This is Marcus du Sautoy. He's professor of mathematics at the University of Oxford, and as well holds the chair, the very prestigious chair for the public understanding of science, following Richard Dawkins in this position. He wrote numerous books and as well presented or produced a couple of TV documentaries and series on BBC 2 and 4. So in England, he's a really well-known person. He specialized on number and group theory, and one book dealing with prime numbers also became a bestseller. And his latest book that was published earlier this year is The Creativity Code. And I think he will present the basic ideas of this book, and not just present them, but as I just found out, he will as well do a couple of tests with us. So, and I think we can be really curious about the outcome of these tests. Yeah. So, the next 20-25 minutes will be all yours, and later on I will ask the others on the panel and introduce them as well.
Cool, thank you very much. So, this kind of section of the festival is all about the impact of artificial intelligence, technology, on literature, the arts, more generally. So I'm going to do something very risky, which is use a bit of technology in my talk, which probably mean it's going to go horribly wrong, and if it does, we'll go analog. But I'm going to try and use a little presentation tool that allows you to interact with what I'm going to talk about. So usually you get told to put your mobile phones away. I want you to take your mobile phones out, and if you want to, and to log on a browser to the following address. So there's a presentation tool called Glissr, so it's glsr.it, and then / creativity code, which is the name of the book that I'm going to talk about and plug rather mercilessly, hopefully get you to buy it afterwards. And so you'll be able to interact, because I'm going to ask you a few questions, see what you think about how well AI is doing at kind of things in the arts. You'll also be able to take the slides home at the end. You can download them, and you can send me a few questions as well if you want. So I think, let's see whether this is going to, let me just, hold on. My technology's already crashed, so this is meant to be, right, let me just, oh, hello. There you are, my computer has, let me just, that's classic. Wow, gosh. Let me just see whether that's what's causing it now. Okay, right, I'm going to have to restart this. This is, there you go. So, of course, we're all a bit worried at the moment about the impact that AI is having on our lives. You know, how many of us are going to be out of a job? Drivers, somebody drove me from the airport this morning, but probably in a few years' time that will not be done by a person, but by artificial intelligence, legal profession, doctors. But we do think there's one thing which is uniquely human, and that's being creative. The things that we're celebrating in a festival like this, we believe are things that are uniquely human. And actually, my own subject of mathematics is one that I regard as something that a computer can't do. A lot of people think that, surely mathematics is the sort of thing a computer would be perfect at doing. But I actually say that I think, well, my subject is a very creative one, and how can a computer do that? But actually, during the in the 90s, I actually got a lot of people kind of saying, oh, surely your job is going to go, because they created a computer that could play chess. Let me see, password is required. Yeah, hold on. I'm just, this is multitasking. So a lot of people said, oh, well, if a computer can play chess, then surely it can do mathematics. But actually, there was always another game. Let's see, right, let's see. There was always another game that I regarded as actually much closer to doing mathematics, which is the game of Go, the ancient game of Go. This is a game played on a 19 by 19 board. Let's see where, and yeah, let's right. Oh gosh. Oh, let's restore those. Yes, that's good. Okay, here we go. And yes, right now I'm going to put that back in. All right, team, we should be there. I hope. I didn't think the technology was going to crash this quickly, but here we go. Excellent. Right, we can go back over there. So this 19 by 19 board, and you put black and white stones down. And actually, this game was regarded as one that computers, they thought would never be able to code up, because it's a game which is very intuitive the way you play it. Players don't really know why they make moves in this game. In the past, you really had to know why you were doing something in order to be able to write the code, to be able to get a computer to do it. But a few years ago, things kind of dramatically changed. And I think that's why we're now talking so much about artificial intelligence. Because in the past, code was written in a very top-down manner. You had to tell the machines what to do. But a few years ago, kind of this idea of something called machine learning has really taken off, where you actually get the code to learn and change itself as it interacts with new data. So by the end of its learning process, this code is being written in a very sort of bottom-up manner. We don't really know how the code is making its decisions. And this is how the company DeepMind in London trained a bit of code to be able to play this game of Go. They gave it a lot of human games to learn on, and then it started to create its own artificial games, synthetic games, by playing itself. And it got to such a high level that DeepMind believed that they could play the world's best, which is Lee Sedol. Lee Sedol was very dismissive, said, it's not going to be able to get anywhere near me. We're going to play 5 games. I'll beat it 5-0. He ended up losing 4-1. The one game that he did win, he now regards as the most valuable game of his whole career. But you know, we're quite used to computers doing things better than humans. It can do calculations much faster than I can. But for me, there was something that very special happened during this match, which is I saw what I thought was the first kind of creative act of a computer. And it happened in the second game against Lee Sedol. Lee Sedol was playing white. He'd put down his move 36. He went to the top of the hotel to smoke a cigarette. He needed nicotine for stimulation. Computers don't need nicotine. Well, maybe this one did need a bit of nicotine to get it going. And then the computer asks the human to place a stone on this black stone, which I've marked a little white dot on it. Interestingly, we still find it quite difficult to program a machine to pick up stones and put them on boards. So this wasn't an exercise in robotics, this was an exercise in pure thought. I was watching these games obsessively on YouTube because I've always felt Go is very close to doing mathematics, and if a computer could play Go, maybe my job would be next in line. And I remember watching these, and as this stone was played, all of the commentators gasped and said, whoa, computers made a really bad mistake here. Because early on in the game, your Go master teaches you to play on the first 4 rows in on the board. That anything further in than 4 rows is considered a very weak move because there's a lot of competition for the edge and kind of for the outside of the board. So when AlphaGo suggested putting a stone on the 5th row in, all the commentators saw this as a weak move and said Lee Sedol will be able to win the game from this point. Lee Sedol came back down again, and his reaction was kind of hilarious to watch because he sort of does this double take when he sees the stone in this 5th position. But he's more suspicious of this and thinks for many minutes before he makes his next move. It turned out that this move was an incredibly inspired move. As the game progressed, more and more stones were put down from the bottom right-hand corner. There was a fighting for territory, and eventually it turned out that that black stone put down in move 37 was the stone that determined who controlled that whole area, and AlphaGo won the second game. Now, for me, this move passes three things that I think you should be looking for if you're going to call something creative. I was on a committee over the last few years in London with our Science Council, or Royal Society. We've been looking at the impact that AI and machine learning is going to have on society. And on the committee with me was actually Demis Hassabis, who's created DeepMind and AlphaGo, but also a philosopher, Margaret Bowden. And Margaret Bowden has been thinking for some time about what she calls these tin cans might be able to do. And she has what I think is quite a nice sort of working definition of creativity. And maybe during the panel we can argue whether this really captures what we mean by creative. But for me, it's quite a useful definition, which is it should be a new act. Well, we can get computers to make things new. That's not very difficult. But it should be surprising and should have value. Now, surprise and value are very subjective things which will change from one period to another, one country to another, one person to another. But I certainly think this move 37, it was a new move. It surprised the commentators because they all gasped when it was made. And ultimately, in a game, it's easy to judge value because that move won AlphaGo the game. So for me, this was an interesting moment, a real sort of phase change, I think, in artificial intelligence. And what was exciting was not only did it win AlphaGo the game, but it's also taught us how to play this game in a completely new way. We'd thought there was an optimal way to play Go, only play on the first 4 rows early on, various different strategies. What this piece of code has shown us is that there is an even superior way to play the game. And this is actually an image that came up quite often in the book that I wrote, which is that as humans, we get very stuck in particular ways of doing things. We repeat behaviors that work for us. I certainly recognize that as a mathematician, things that work for me. And I think we end up behaving a little bit too much like machines, just repeating these behaviors. And what I've been excited to see is how the artificial intelligence has been kicking us out of our very mechanistic ways of thinking and showing us potentially new and exciting ways of being creative as humans. So generally, books about AI are pretty dystopic. I'm hoping that this book is a bit more of an optimistic take, and I think we'll hear in the panel the way that AI can help an artist be creative and do new things. So this is really the journey of this book, which I've called the Creativity Code. Is there a code to capture the idea of being creative? And I've looked in the book at my own subject of mathematics, whether AI can prove theorems, but also across the arts as well, to see how well it's doing in different realms of the arts. And interestingly, one of the very first coders in history, Ada Lovelace, was already thinking about the potential of code to do things certainly more interesting than just the calculations that she saw Babbage's machine doing. But she was already thinking, well, maybe this code could one day be creative in its own right. And she wrote in the notes that she wrote about the machine of Babbage's, the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. Of course, music has a lot in common with mathematics, the idea of patterns. Maybe a machine could spot those patterns and make its own patterns. But she had a word of caution about the power of the machine. She said, it is desirable to guard against the possibility of exaggerated ideas that might arise. That's the powers of the analytic engine. It has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do whatever we order it to perform. And I think this has been the thought in the past, that, well, the code is being written by a human. So the human is the creative one. The code is just implementing the ideas of the human. But I think this is what has changed in these last few years, where now we're getting code which is changing, mutating, becoming something different from what the original human wrote, because it's interacting with data and changing and becoming something independent. So you've probably all heard of the Turing Test. Can a computer pass itself off as a human in an interaction online, that you could not tell the difference between the human and the computer? There's now a new test, which is something called the Lovelace test. This is the challenge of whether, whether a machine can originate a creative work of art such that the process is repeatable. So it's important, it shouldn't be some random glitch coming from the outside. The code should know what it's doing in some sense. And yet the programmer, the person who wrote the original code, is unable to explain how the algorithm produces its output. So the challenge that the Lovelace challenge test is posing is, can we really say that it's the code that's being creative because the original coder really doesn't know what the code is doing? It's starting to make its own decisions. So can we get a state where the output is really something that deserves to be called the creation of the code rather than the coder? So I'm going to look at a few areas of art. We're at a literature festival, but actually I'm going to take visual art as the first place that I'm going to look, because this is where machine learning and AI has been very successful. In the past, it was one of the great hurdles to get a computer to recognize what was in an image. We can very easily, with our brains, pick out the story inside an image, but a computer was having a lot of difficulty reading the story of a picture. But machine learning, by showing it different examples of this is a cat, this is a dog, it has learned how to see what's in a picture. So I'm going to start with the visual domain and see how successful AI has been creatively in the visual world. And as any creative artist, you start by looking at the art of the past and learning from that. So I'm going to start with a story where AI took an artist from the past, learned the particular style of painting, and then was able to reproduce something that was very similar in style. So you can probably recognize the artist here. This is Rembrandt. Well, one of these is Rembrandt, and the other is an image that was produced by machine learning after having learnt on the particular style of Rembrandt's paintings. So here's my first challenge to you. So if you'll get your phones out, I'm going to send to you these two images. I want you to see, can you sniff out which of these images is artificial, which is not created by a human? Basically, it took all of Rembrandt's paintings, understood that Rembrandt has a very special way of using light, the way the portrait sits. So what I want you to do is to press on the image that you think is artificial and then send that to me. Are people succeeding in doing this? A few people? Good. And then hopefully the data will come through. This is my test of whether... so here we go. So... here's some of the data coming from you. This is, rather annoyingly, pie charts go clockwise. So the red corresponds to the image on the left rather than the image on the right. So at the moment, there's kind of a majority going for the image on the left being the artificial one. But it's clear that you're not too sure because it's not completely obvious. So who voted for the image on the left being artificial? What for you was giving it away that this is artificial? Too perfect. Interesting. Who chose the image on the right as being artificial? Yes, sir. What was your... Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah. An artificial moustache. Right, you think he's in disguise, maybe. Okay, so good. Well, so we've got a split here. Interesting, this idea of the image being sort of too perfect, and I think that does give it away. So you're right. Actually, it's the image on the left is the one that was artificial. A few whoops at the back there. Yeah, whoa, I got that one right. Good, excellent. So very good. Now there was a Rembrandt expert who came to view this, and he was incredibly critical and wanted to sort of pull this to pieces. But the only thing he could criticize this painting for, in fact, it was 3D printed, so they even understood Rembrandt's particular style of putting paint on the canvas, which is very unique as well. And the only thing he could criticize it for is that the style of paint on the canvas was 20 years earlier than the style of the actual portrait. So the team thought they'd done pretty well if that was the only thing they could criticize it for. But you might say, well, you know, that's not really being creative. We've got Rembrandts. Why do we want new Rembrandts? But I think there is a point, which is sometimes machine learning is very good at giving us new insights into old data. So perhaps it can tell us new things about old artists. In particular, if you take someone like Jackson Pollock, for example, a mathematical algorithmic analysis has shown that his style of painting produces a very unique geometric shape, which is a fractal, and can be used, actually, that new insight to be able to sniff out some fakes that people, you think it might be very easy to make a Jackson Pollock by flicking paint around. But actually, it's quite difficult. It's a very unique thing that he's making. So there is a point about looking at the art of the past, which is seeing new things. But not everyone agrees. This is one of my favorite art critics in The Guardian, Jonathan Jones. He wrote, "What a horrible," about this particular project, "what a horrible, tasteless, insensitive, and soulless travesty of all that is creative in human nature when technology is used for things it should never be used for." But frankly, anyone who wears a shirt like that, I don't really trust as an art critic. But I think the point is to try and push into the new. So having learned on the art of the past, can AI produce something that is genuinely interestingly new in the visual realm? So here's your next challenge. 4 of these paintings are done by human. 4 of these paintings are done by artificial intelligence. Can you sniff out which are the artificial ones? So again, I'm going to send these to you. So on your mobiles now, you should have the choice of these. Oops, seems to want to chip on. So I want you to pick the 4 paintings that you think are not done by a human and send those to me. So some of you I can see sending me a little bit of data. So let's see what you're thinking. So again, remember the red correspond. Oh, wow, that's very Brexity. You don't seem to know what you're deciding. A little bit of an edge for now the images on the right. So 53% thinking these ones on the right are artificial. So who's voted for the ones on the right being artificial? Yes, what for you is giving those away as artificial, the ones on the right? More chaotic. Oh, okay, you think I'm... Those are two... So you're double bluffing me and try to second guess what I'm trying to lead you. Okay, fair enough. Okay, anyone voted for the more geometric ones on the left? Why do you feel those are artificial? The right ones please you more, so they're probably done by a human rather than these. The human should understand your emotional... Well, this is very interesting, your reaction, because this is absolutely the same reaction that a lot of people had when they were shown these in Basel. So the Basel Art Fair, they showed all of these paintings, didn't tell anybody that there was any artificial intelligence at all. People will ask, which paintings do you find more emotionally engaging? And they absolutely voted for the ones that you voted for, but it turns out that those are the artificial ones. So then, do you feel cheated? A bit. You feel cheated a bit, don't you? Because you want to actually feel like you're connecting with another emotional world, as you said. But I think... you shouldn't feel cheated because the artificial intelligence learned on our emotional world. It took all of the paintings of the last 1,500 years, and it learned about what we like expressing through our paintings. Yes. Yes. So does it understand what it's doing? Well, now we're getting to the interesting nub of the problem. Now, first of all, I want something new. So this isn't just reproducing what we've seen before, because this was actually created by something called a creative adversarial network. And this is two algorithms working sort of with or against each other. So because we want new things. We don't want repetition of what we've seen already, like the Rembrandt. So this was one algorithm that was looking at all of the styles of art of the past. And it almost learned to become an art historian. So you could give it a painting, it would say, oh, that's cubist art, that's pointillist art. But then it was tasked with making something which didn't fit into any of those patterns. So that was its job. It had to make something which didn't fit the patterns. But it still had to be art. So it recognized the kind of overarching parameters of what we regard as art, but it had to make something that broke the style. The second algorithm was tasked with saying, well, was it good enough or not? If it said, well, you haven't gone far enough because I recognize that style, or, well, you've gone far too far because that isn't art in my eyes. So you had these two algorithms working together and produce something which, first of all, had some emotional resonance, because it had somehow learnt on our emotional world, yet was creating something new. And it's interesting, often when I show these, people sniff those out as artificial because they say they're too complicated, they're too busy. And that's interesting, because computers don't mind complicated and busy, but for us, our embodied beings, after a while, it becomes too hard to look at. So this is interesting, I think, because it's creating something which is starting to push into the new. But for me, one of the most interesting stories I saw, here's my little quote from Paul Valéry, French poet, which kind of captures this idea of creativity being a sort of competition between two sides. I certainly recognize that in my mathematics. I have collaborators. I've got a collaborator here in Germany, and I'm the kind of creative, bubbly one, and he's the sort of critic of what I'm doing. Whilst in Israel, I have a kind of opposite relationship, where I have a mathematician who's he's the kind of one creating things, and I'm the discriminator algorithm in that. So, and Paul Valéry says, it takes two to invent anything. The one makes up combinations, and the other one chooses. And I think that's nice. What these algorithms are doing is capturing that idea of creativity that we have in our minds. But one of the most interesting stories, and I think this goes to the heart of why we create art, you said you wanted to understand the emotional world of somebody else by looking at those paintings, is one of the challenges is that we don't really understand now how these algorithms are making their decisions, because they're changing, mutating, becoming something new. So Google image recognition software is one of very powerful. If you give it this image, I play in a string quartet, if you give it this picture, it can identify that this is a string quartet, the violins and the cello. But Google were interested, but what is it really seeing? How does it see the world? It can classify it, but what is it really seeing in this picture? And so they asked the algorithm to just accentuate any little feature that they were seeing in the image. A bit like you look at the clouds in the sky and you say, well, that looks like a sheep, or that looks like a snake. And so I put this through the same thing and asked Google, well, what are you seeing in this picture? And I put it through several times, and this is the image that came out. And this gives us an insight into how the AI is seeing, how it's learned, because suddenly the first violin has become this exotic leopard animal, the lower strings have become a car, and we understand that it's learned on images of animals, of faces, of mechanical things. And this can help us to sniff out sometimes when there's bad learning. So for example, the AI was given this very grey image and started to see dumbbells appearing inside this image. But the dumbbells, when it started producing them, always had arms attached to them. Why? Because it had never seen a dumbbell on its own. It thought it was an extension of our anatomy. It had only learnt on images of strong men and women holding up dumbbells. So by looking at the art that AI produces, it can help us actually to understand how the AI is thinking, how it's learnt, sometimes how it's learnt things badly. I did an event last year with a roboticist, a woman from MIT, and she told me this story, how she'd had some robots delivered to her with visual recognition software. She started to try and engage with the robots, but they would not recognize that she was in front of the robot until she put a white mask on. She was a black woman, and suddenly the robots reacted and started interacting. Why? Because the software had only learnt on images of white male faces. And as she looked at the software, she understood the biases that had started to appear. So she's now started something called the Algorithmic Justice League, which is a great name, looking at just trying to sniff out when bad learning has happened inside AI. But I think that's what's exciting, the role that art can play in detecting these kind of things that are creeping into our society. As Marshall McLuhan said, art is a distant early warning system that can always be relied on to tell the old culture what is beginning to happen to it. Unfortunately, we're the old culture. Great. Let me skip this next one. This is about music. I just wanted to go to literature and just illustrate that although AI has been very successful in the visual world, in the written word, I think it's still got a long way to go. So this was a project started by an American team called Botnik. They love Harry Potter. They said, we'd love an 8th volume of Harry Potter. And they took all of the 7 volumes that J.K. Rowling had written, got the AI to learn the particular style that J.K. Rowling has, the themes, the characters, to produce an 8th book. I love the title of this book. It's called Harry Potter and the Portrait of What Looked Like a Large Pile of Ash. It's a great title. But anyway, it started off quite well. Magic. It was something that Harry Potter thought was very good. So it's already picked up that magic is an important theme in these books. Leathery sheets of rain lashed at Harry's ghost as he walked across the grounds. I think that's a lovely image, leathery sheets of rain. I don't think I would have come up with such an interesting description of rain. Anyway, it started off well, but gradually it started to lose the plot. Oops, here we go. Ron was standing there and doing a kind of frenzied tap dance, it went on. He saw Harry and immediately began to eat Hermione's family. Ron's Ron shirt was just as bad as Ron himself. And I think this is the challenge. AI is very good at kind of these snapshots coming from art, but when it has to tell a story, it very quickly loses context, where it's coming from, where it's going to. And the musical examples I looked at, it can be very interesting locally, but after a while the music just becomes boring. So I think this is a real challenge for AI, that locally it can tease out a pattern, but globally it seems to not be able to maintain a structure. And interestingly, I think art, as was said, is about connecting with another human. In fact, I think art is our greatest tool for trying to understand one of the great challenges in science, which is the hard problem of consciousness. What is your emotional world? Is it anything like mine? Your consciousness, is it like mine? As George Eliot said, the greatest benefit we owe to the artist, whether painter, poet, or novelist, is the extension of our sympathies. Art is the nearest thing to life. It is a mode of amplifying experience and extending our contact with our fellow men beyond the bounds of our personal lot. Now, I think your consciousness is fairly similar, probably, to mine. But if this thing ever becomes conscious, if it suddenly goes, iPhone think, therefore iPhone am, and I've got to think, is it really conscious? I think its consciousness is going to be very different. And as Wittgenstein said, if a lion could speak, we could not understand him. And when these things become conscious, their consciousness is going to be very different. And I think it's going to be the art that it produces which will be our best tool for trying to understand maybe what it will be like to be a piece of artificial intelligence. Thank you.
So he's an artist, so he's he's a painter, and came to Berlin like in 1989.
30 years ago.
Yeah, exactly 30 years ago.
In Berlin, actually.
And at some point he decided to work with AI, and you will present now a short film, just like 2 minutes, to give an idea of how it works.
Yes, I hope. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here, and I will start my, not really presentation. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting thing. With a short film about how it is to work with the artificial intelligence.
At night, a winding street, surrounded by trees, a house in the distance, the horizon. The road ends behind a hill. One moment in time. How many ways can we perceive this image? How many times can we paint it? How often can we be inspired by it? Enough for a lifetime. This is unfinished. Roman Lipski and YQP present the birth of an artificial muse, a machine in search of diversity, inspiration, and transformation. The first true partnership between a painter and artificial intelligence. A neural network was injected with 9 paintings by Lipski. The machine analyzed different facets of the paintings and adapted Lipski's style. With time, the system learned to generate an infinite amount of unique images. These images supplied Lipski with new compositions, perspectives, and themes. For over 2 years, every new painting by Lipski has been re-ingested into the system, creating an ongoing exchange between man and machine. Like a creative mirror, the AI reveals facets of his art that he had never seen before. With help from the digital muse, Lipski has transformed his artistic language and constantly finds new ways to express himself. Just as the invention of the camera helped painters to explore new perspectives, AI could ultimately introduce a new art with endless possibilities. And this is just the beginning.
If you're curious, you can look on the web. You can go on the website www.onr.de, and you get the opportunity to see the streaming of the artificial picture created by the machine, and you can stop it or save it. You can just be you can just look at it.
So first I'll introduce the remaining 2 panelists. Right next to me is Elvia Wilk. She's a writer, as well curator. Did a lot of art critique and essay writing in the arts in numerous magazines and newspapers, and as well published a novel earlier this year, Over. Next to us, Sybille Krämer. She is professor for philosophy of many topics, but let's say mainly language and media theory. And she, maybe in this context interesting, she published a book on Ada Lovelace like a couple of years ago. Maybe we start with Roman, as he just showed us this. So you've been doing this for 3 years, and you just...
For 4 years, actually.
For 4 years, okay. And so, yeah, what does it feel like?
It feels great, yeah. It's absolutely amazing story to use the algorithm on the right way, of course, yeah. Everything is, sorry for my English if I may, but I do my best. Everything is, the first things first, very important thing is to recognize what do you expect of the artificial intelligence. And pretty soon I recognized that the artificial intelligence can release, or the outputs that I got after a while, after I trained the algorithm, that the outputs help me truly to support my own, not creativity, but support my own way to be a better artist. It sounds complicated, but it's work like this. I don't use the artificial intelligence as a creative AI. I use them as an inspirational AI, and there is a huge difference between them.
And you put in different, you started always, it's all that you're working on is always started with this one image, this one photograph. It's endless variations, and then you put in again your paintings, and then you never put in any new photographs.
Absolutely, it's...
I mean, pictures of the photograph. You never put in the actual photograph. You only put in your pictures.
I have to photograph them, of course. I have to digitalize them.
Yeah, but I mean, it's always paintings that only got.
Yes,
bigger.
of course. Mm-hmm. It's and very important things. Everything, every picture I use to train the systems are based on me, are created by me. And at the beginning, I was pretty naive, and everything has started with the crisis, with the creative crisis. I painted since many years before I met it's that data scientist Florian Doman, and he explained me very passionately about AI. I stuck to it in the crisis, and I couldn't take a step forward, couldn't paint picture that I really appreciated, that I really wanted. I was a little bit like a robot. I repeat myself over and over the same story. The pictures they was pretty cool. I find buyers and I have museums exhibition. This was not the point, but I, as a creative person, I was very unhappy. And after I recognized that the artificial intelligence are able to learn, the systems are really able to learn, it's absolutely amazing, then I decided to start a project. And at the beginning, my wish was to create something like a very best Lipski. And of course, that will be absolutely a disaster. Yeah, it's happened completely different. The story, as the cooperation or the dialogue with the machine work on the complete another way. Pretty soon, after I feed the machine or I train the machine with just only at my works, you can see it on the movie. It was very important for me to know what happened then. Yeah, I didn't want to have a kind of pre-trained machine with the picture, with the big data pictures. And so I wanted to see what happened then with my own picture, with my own style. And after I created a small data with 70 pieces, I sent them to the Florian, and Florian started to train the machine. And after some weeks, we got first outputs picture, digital picture, and there was thousands of them, and we celebrated because the digital picture had the absolutely an artistic quality, and most of them was much more better than my picture, the picture painted by me, and I was a little bit upset, but I recognized that there will be no good to use them as a separate, as the autonomic art pieces, but the best solution to combine human creativity and artificial creativity is to use the artificial picture as an inspiration. And so I decided to repeat the procedure, and I started a kind of dialogue, a kind of ping-pong between me and machine, and after pretty soon, after 1 year, I got a very huge success. My dream became true because I wished always to be a abstract painter. I painted realistic before, and pretty soon, with the help of the machine, of the algorithm, of the AI Muse, I painted really my first abstract picture, and actually I'm an abstract painter, and even more because there's a very strong concept behind them. I'm a conceptual artist now.
Okay, so Sybille Krämer, what do you think about these tools or artificial creativity? For you, does this count as a medium, or what is it as a philosopher?
For me, there are lots of questions. The first would be how to think about technology and the machine. Because normally, technology is really not a substitution of the human part, but it is an enhancement to do something which is not possible for a human being to do, as in the forensic analysis of prints and so on. Well, and if I look to AI in the horizons of the idea that always there is a kind of interaction between machine and human being, then I see that there is in no way something like self-organization, a self-organized creativity by the machine, because you have to learn the algorithm to do something, and you have to present thousands, for example, of examples. You mentioned already about this. No algorithm will function without having given these lots of data and examples. But these data, well, they are produced by the human beings. There must be Rembrandt, and you cannot imagine that the machine is something doing without a human being before.
But also human beings can't be human beings without human beings before. If you deny a human being any interaction with language, data, aren't you demanding too much of a machine?
Yeah, and therefore I think we have to think about it in interactional terms. Even in our normal intelligence, so to say, we are interacting with others, collective intelligence. We are interacting with tools. We are interacting with symbols. And this principle, interaction, not action of the machine, but interaction, it's a very simple story. Yes, I know it's much more complicated, but the main idea is that we have to think about the action of machines in terms of interactions between collective human intelligence and machine algorithms. This would be the first answer to this. And I am only one short sentence. I'm a little bit skeptical about the absolutism of creativity. It's a very Western concept of art. Be innovative, be original, be new, and so on and so on. For thousands of years, there had been aesthetics, but aesthetics in the Greek sense of aesthesis, coming something to the senses. And normally, this means, in other cultures, repetition. From the master to the pupil, and so on and so on. And I think we should be very careful not to make such an absolute picture of the Western perspective of thinking about art as the whole story to tell about art and machine intelligence.
I agree. I think this is a very, very useful term, interactivity, because it allows us to see some of the assumptions behind the very notion of creativity, which is that it's singular and that it comes from inside the person and that it emanates from some authentic place, maybe pre-linguistic often when we're not talking about literature, and maybe even when we're talking about literature, we think about this sort of like or zone that it's coming from inside, when of course it's much more a genotype-phenotype situation. You might have certain innate qualities, but what comes of them is a response to your environment and entirely conditioned by the social and cultural worlds in which we live. So to imagine that there would be kind of like this well of creative aesthetic production that would then be, then enter into conversation with machines or then directly meet an audience, right? This idea of like my subjective world is conveyed through aesthetics to yours. There's a lot else going on in that ecosystem, and I think there always has been, and it's hard to, it's much easier to see how complicated that is once we have machines that are also able to act in a collaborative sense. So maybe collaboration would be another word I would want to bring in. I have had very similar experiences with needing material feedback in a creative process. So I used to write poetry and eventually got so stuck that I had to teach myself to code because I needed the language to make mistakes and have some accidents because I couldn't handle the blank page anymore and I was just repeating myself. So I taught myself some very, very basic code. And through that act, I learned to use language differently because I also learned to think of language in a poetic but functional sense. And that's arguably much closer to the way that most language in the world is really being used, is also some kind of algorithmic process. So that material feedback, whether or not it's collaborative, right, whether or not you have a mathematical collaborator who's a person, or whether or not I have a collaborator who's a computer or an algorithm that is replicating paintings, it's much, to me the question is sort of like the feedback loop and the source material. And the question might also be, medium material feedback, but collaborator. And at what point could you call something a collaborative process?
Yeah, and you presented a short story earlier today, no? In which...
the last panel.
Yeah, in which it's a kind of cyborg scenario where this artificial creativity tools exist and then make you like paint a perfect Rembrandt or Picasso, and you can upload them. They're still relatively pricey in your story, and so there is still a bit of an exclusivity around it. But yeah, it's this idea that the collaboration in the end is actually taking place within yourself, no?
Right, so the only science fictional innovation in this story that I read some of in the previous panel is that the collaborative artificial intelligence is implanted in the body, so it becomes sort of part of your brain. That's, I think, really just a literary device. That's like something science fiction authors always do. It's just like, well, if we put it in the body, then it will seem crazier and we can really meditate on what this is about, but like you can think about it with a smartphone. Like we don't really need to upload like a Rembrandt augmentation into the brain to imagine what that might do. In fact, you're doing it for us. But I do think, it immediately sets off alarm bells for people once you incorporate it into the body. It's a body horror scenario. And I think that's actually quite a useful provocation still to sort of think about what would happen if it were embodied. And I guess something that Sybille brought up that was important is that these augmented, I guess they're called augments in the story, is that they are not so much information about what something is, but really physically instantiated knowledge about how to do something. So for instance, you could learn to ride a horse without having ridden a horse. That's not the same thing as being like having memorized all of the Harry Potter or something. It's about a physically instantiated kind of knowledge and muscle memory, which is something that people are thinking about a lot right now, like VR training, like how you could teach yourself to perform heart surgery just like through virtual reality. I think this is like kind of a major question, and also a reason that I wanted to have the technology incorporated in the body. So you have to think about like the human and the limits of the body as part of the way that machines might learn in the future.
So before this open up to questions from the audience, I would like to ask one final question to... Yes, of course.
I would ask the two male panel members, not the moderator, what is art? Because normally art is what people accept as art. It doesn't mention whoever has produced it, a machine or a child, sometimes an animal or whatever. I'm a little bit provocative or something like that. The only what matters is if there is a community accepting a thing as a kind of art, and in capitalism to pay for it, or a museum to get it to its collection. Therefore, what art is nothing intrinsic. It is not depending on the author of a thing, on the producer, but it depends on acceptance, social acceptance. This is the most interesting thing. Perhaps it's not so very interesting if a machine or human being has produced it, or?
It could be an answer for your own question, I suppose. I have a $1 million question. There is no really definition what art is. It's not to be an artist. It doesn't mean to produce something like picture or read the books. I suppose the very important thing is for artists, to be an artist, is to ask a question, to create a new positive utopian, and to this is a kind of art for me. I recognize I not really recognize, but I realized actually that the picture that I do actually are no really matter for me. It's even if I'm really a painter, much more important is to develop a new kind of handling and to thinking and to think, and also to the developing of a new concept. For example, this is something like this. I'm just a simple painter. I'm not a kind of intellectual guy. I practice it, yeah. And this is just a try or to give you an answer.
I think there's something interesting going to emerge here, which is at the moment we're talking about collaboration and something quite close between what the AI is producing because it's learned on our styles. But what's starting to appear is a complexity that the AI is quite happy to indulge in, which we as humans are finding more and more challenging to engage with. One of the examples in music that I had was a jazz musician where the AI learnt to improvise alongside in the style that he played in, but he said that it was starting to do things that were just of a complexity that he physically couldn't embody. so he couldn't play it back, but also just orally was becoming too difficult to navigate. And one of my favorite AI movies is Her. I don't know whether you've seen Her. It's about, so I see some nodding. It's about an AI girlfriend that this guy splits up with his partner, and he downloads a AI girlfriend. But halfway through the movie, the AI says, look, interactions with humans are just so slow. I have to wait for you to type things in. I can get to know another AI in a nanosecond, and we have complete history of everything that we've been through. And the rate of interaction that AI is having, the complexity that it can achieve, means that we're going to start to see something that we as a human species just do not understand. I think that we're going to see AI looking back at humans in the same way that we humans look at mountains. We don't think mountains move very much, but if you look in deep time, a mountain is an incredibly active and has a life. But I think that we're going to see a disconnect starting to happen with the art that AI is producing, that it will start to make things of its own that doesn't need to learn on us. You already see that with AlphaGo, actually. AlphaGo learnt on human games and then played its own. But then DeepMind created AlphaZero, which said, let's forget the human games and the bias of everything that we do. Let's get it to start tabula rasa, just tell it the rules of the game and see what it does. It produced an algorithm that was able to beat AlphaGo at every single game. So I think that'll be the interesting thing, where we stop giving it our data and allow it perhaps to have a parameter space where it produces something really not connected with where we've come from. Maybe that's impossible.
I think maybe this is completely a wrong figure, but I was told that most of the digital text being produced in the world at the moment is being produced relatively autonomously by machines for other machines to read. So if we're even thinking about the future of literature, the question might not be who's the writer, but who's the reader. It's the same with the art audience. If a machine is able to produce things that much more quickly in a completely different mode than we might be able to even ontologically encounter it, then the question is also who is the art for, and does it matter if we're involved at all? Are we maybe a mediator at this point?
I think that's interesting in respect to the humanities, because 19th century novels, many novels have never been read in the 20th century, but a computer can take all of 19th century novels. I can only read 3,000 books, I calculated, in a lifetime. Well, there are many more than that out there. So we might get new insights because an AI can take the whole of literature, and the scale at which it can navigate data means we might discover novels which at that time were not resonant, but now are incredibly interesting.
But still, the AI systems are not creative. Yeah? Absolutely not. The outputs, the results are so good as the inputs, as the information that the human created. Yeah? The computer, the systems have no really wish to create something.
Well, there are two different things in there, and I think you identified the wish to create is certainly not there. The intention intentionality is very important. That's still, AlphaGo didn't want to play Go. The humans wanted to try and beat the...
Absolutely.
But I disagree with you that I think we are creating code which is producing something which is more than what we've put in.
That's the reason why we're here, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's
What I really appreciate, the systems are very fast and they are able to create a very, very big a lot of combination. Yeah, that's it is. And I spoke to the mathematicians in my team. There is a very smart person, and he told me, because I of course at the beginning I have the romantic vision. I created a artificial intelligence muse, something beautiful, and he told me, Roman, you crazy? This is just mathematics. There is nothing romantic there. They're just combinations.
But what are we as humans, if not just a piece of mathematics as well? Because we don't understand how it works, but our internal neuronal structure, our subconscious, is making particular connections, and then it gets articulated in our conscious. I think we're seeing the same beginning to happen in code, where the code has become so complex that it's almost got its own internal consciousness. It cannot express why it's making decisions, and we cannot analyze the code to understand how it's happening. So the outputs are almost the conscious expression of code, which is now could be called subconscious.
But is opacity then the mark of creativity in this?
No, I didn't say it was creativity. I'm saying opacity is we do not understand the code in the same way that we don't understand our subconscious. So I'm not saying that opacity is not my qualification for, but I'm saying we're seeing something similar to our own feeling of like, I don't know why I'm expressing this or where it's come from. Code in the past, we understood how it worked. Code now, we don't. Mm-hmm. So suddenly opacity has appeared.
For me, it is a little bit unhappy to use this word artificial intelligence. I would prefer deep learning or something like this.
Well, I think you're
procedures,
yeah.
Because what is it to human intelligence? It's a very complicated question. What I see is in every particular specialized field, action, a machine can be better than we are. And I think it is without limit. Whatever you are doing in a very specialized manner, once more again, a machine in future will do it better. But human intelligence means I'm able to be a philosopher, I'm able to ride a horse, I'm able to gardening, I'm able to make this and this and this, and this kind of changing the particular interests in the horizons of which you are doing something is for me a special sign, this kind of flexibility. And wherever there is a machine, there is no universal or global machine. Every machine, the Turing machine,
yes.
Universal machine, but you have to instruct it, whatever, and it has only a special sense to do something, not to change to all possible fields, I think. For me, I'm reflecting on it. I have not a real answer what it is to be intelligent for human beings, but I think it must be this being able not only to make something particular.
I think this is why AI is having a lot of difficulty with language, is that just giving an AI a lot of language data is not good enough for it to understand the complexities of language. The Winograd challenges, which are always given in the Loebner test, in Turing Test, where if I say the government denied the demonstrators a permit because they feared violence or they advocated violence, we understand that when they say feared, refers to the government, but if it's they advocated, we know that they refers to the demonstrators. You give that to an AI, it hasn't got a clue because it doesn't understand the context and the richer context of that language. It cannot pick that up just from data interaction with text. So I think you're absolutely right that this is one of the reasons I think that AI is having a lot of difficulty with language, because it's being only given language. It isn't given the richer parts of our society, history, culture, everything else.
Well, it isn't given parents or friends. I mean, wouldn't the question be how to socialize the AI rather than how to give it enough information?
One of the most interesting stories I saw was, I think we want an empathetic AI, one that's on our side. And there was an interesting case where I used to love these stories as a kid where you chose the story. So it said, if you want to go into the attic, turn to page 37. To go into the cellar, go to 36. And we saw, if people have seen Black Mirror's Bandersnatch episode, you get to choose the narrative. This AI was given a tree of possible stories to tell, but it was trained on stories that humans had already told. And then when it told its own story, the story was much more humane and human and recognizable, as opposed to an AI that hadn't learnt on our stories and was terribly dystopic. So I think that an AI that's trained on our art, our literature, our music, is one that may potentially be more on our side and more empathetic and understand us than one that's not trained on our data.
But what about but what about being on our side also in the side of like ecological systems larger than the scale of the single human, or like a planetary system that includes AI, slime mold, fungus, trees, and humans? Would it really necessarily be telling us human stories, or would it be telling us a story that would be beneficial to a larger ecosystem but very anti-human? I don't know if the human is maybe the empathy that we need. In fact, maybe less human-centric systems could be developed with the help of an AI.
Yeah, it will definitely have it much easier to understand them, yeah, to listen to them.
I think that's
imagine we are hugging a tree and we don't even know if the tree actually is completely disgusted by it, yeah, stuff like that. We have really no idea. Maybe we open it up to the audience for a few questions in the remaining time. Yeah, here, over there. There's a mic.
Just about the heart problem and its relationship to creativity. It seems really, and I'm sure as a mathematician you probably had these experiences, and there's a book by Jacques Hadamard from 1946, The Psychology of Mathematical Invention, that really the heart of the creative process happens in the dark. And that's the same thing with Henri Poincaré and the Jacobian functions. And when you read about it, you see, whoa, it comes already solved. So it seems like it would be a bit hard to, it seems like creativity and the heart problem don't have much to do with each other.
Well, I think what's interesting is that feeling of something coming out of nowhere. As a mathematician, you spend a lot of time laying the kind of groundwork for it, and my best work is always done weirdly on trains. I find the kind of images going past at a particular speed always produce a kind of thought from nowhere. I recognize Poincaré had this revelation getting onto a bus. Suddenly everything clicks. Turing had revelation running by the Cam in Cambridge. But I think that this is, I feel like my brain in these fallow times is like just bashing out chords on a piano, and most of the time it's just noise, and then suddenly something resonates, and then that is shot up to my conscious as the kind of aha moment. So that's what I think is exciting, because I'm seeing code starting to behave much more like that, that the complexity of possibilities, it's not a top-down such that somehow we know what's happening. I mean, I don't understand my creative process. I think nobody is, it's very hard to, and if you do, it probably isn't being creative. So what I think is exciting is starting to see the same level of kind of subconscious to conscious output that seems to start to be happening in machine learning code.
It was in the past, I suppose, yeah, the black box situation. Absolutely, yeah. It was. I waited, excited for the results without the possibility to have influenced the results. But actually, for example, I used you thought about it. I used actually the GANs networks, the generative adversarial networks, and they work on this different way. I have the possibility to get influence, to influence the results. First of all, I have to kind of inspire the generative network. There are two networks, generative and the second called, how is it?
Discriminated.
Discriminated network, yeah, thank you. And I can determine the results with objects. It depends of the how you work. As I painter, I use just a simple webcam. It's my sensoric, and the webcam, everything what the webcam take off started to be changed in the way like the network are pre-trained, and at least I got some results, but the results are similar. Like I can really determine the results on the way. Yeah? The results at the end they look like they have some. They have some. I wish to speak German to you. Die sehen aus wie so ein bisschen, die haben Merkmale. Das ist der Wort, den ich gesucht habe. Die haben Merkmale wie die Inspiration, die ich ganz am Anfang gestartet habe. Inzwischen, I can switch to English. In between, I am a kind of sculpture because to generate cool, really great digital picture, first of all, I created some sculpture. It's a very nice situation. And everything happened in a lifetime. The systems are very fast, and I have the opportunity, I have the chance to determine the results. It's absolutely cool.
This makes me think it might be nice to talk about creativity, not just in terms of output, but in terms of learning, labor, curiosity, joy, indulgence, luxury, all of those great things that come of interacting with the world and the tools that we have, like storytelling and materials.
I think the definition I give towards the end of the book is actually Carl Rogers, the psychologist's definition, which is exactly that. The creativity isn't about this output, it's about a human's internal world engaging with the external world, and as a kind of medium between those two. So I think you're absolutely right.
But isn't the discourse on artificial intelligence a kind of black boxing again? If I have a paper of artificial flatness, all is transparent. I have a map, I have a bird's eye view on it, and so on and so on. But if the map or the paper is getting a screen, then there is a whole universe or rhizome in Gilles Deleuze and Guattari behind the screen of interacting protocols, machines, algorithms, and the user sitting in front does not see what is happening. This means that the non-knowledge, the human unconscious is coming back by the black box of the computer. And back to the strategies of artificial intelligence. Make a machine to learn how to handle pictures. First, to identify lines on the first layer, on the basic layer, on the next layer, to identify corners, on the next layer, to identify Farben? Colors, yes, colors. And so on and so on. And now you are building a model for a machine being able to identify objects on a picture. But then this model is used by other forms of deep learning, and the engineers don't have access to what has happened on the basic level of examples and so on and so on. And therefore, I think it's complicated to describe, and I cannot do it in English and here in this realm. But I think in the inner heart of artificial deep learning strategies, there is a kind of black boxing because models of basic competences learned by a machine are used in other fields without people being able to judge and to know what had been the original data, the original examples by which the machine was trained. And I think this kind of transgression of models in deep learning strategies is a kind of black boxing again, in a very subtle, technical sense, perhaps. Creating non-knowledge.
Yeah, one last question. Okay, yeah.
I think what makes human beings make art is the process. That is what makes them happy. I can speak now from my own opinion because I'm writing poetry. And at the moment when I write, for example, a poem about a tree, I become a medium. This means the tree talks to me. So I get some information from the tree. It depends when I watch the tree, if it is in the spring or in the summer, I get a different information. So this inner process is which makes me happy to write the poem. If the poem becomes good or bad, that's not the task. So if I give now this artificial intelligence machine 100 points of me, it can, of course, algorithmically compare the structures, find some things, but the result, which I believe will not have a soul, because it cannot act as a medium, and it cannot understand. We can also not understand the physics, how I interact with a tree. So the waves I send and the waves I get back, if we knew the physics and could write it in an equation, it could be possible that the artificial intelligence also can beat me in the sense that can feel this inner process as a happy thing. That's why I'm doing poetry, because I used to be a scientist. I did my PhD in mechanics, and then I stopped. And I'm doing now a lot of art. And I can only tell from my point of view that my brain is functioning differently when I'm doing art than I'm doing science. It's not the same.
I made a conjecture in the book, which was, when do we see humans actually starting to create art? It's probably 40,000 years ago. We see kind of creative acts making tools much before that, but the kind of act of just making something for the enjoyment of it or sharing the story with somebody else. And my conjecture was, I suspect this is also when a kind of level of consciousness began to emerge in the human species of a different kind of level to that had gone before. And it's that feeling of exploring your own inner world, trying to understand whether, I think you mentioned how we sit in front of a screen and we do not understand what's going on underneath that screen. And that sounded very much like my interactions with my wife. We have these kind of interactions, and I spend time with her, and I still don't understand her. But our interactions with people are exactly that. We do not. We have this kind of idea of homogeneity. We think there's similar worlds to ours, and that's our exploration of whether that's true or not. My wife's synesthetic. I don't have that conscious experience of a mixture of senses that she has. That's a very different sort of consciousness to mine. So I think that's that kind of drive that you're having is exploring your own and also sharing with others to see whether there's resonance there. And until this thing becomes conscious, it's really not very interesting, I think. It is just, analyzing things and suggesting new things for our consciousness.
Could I just...
Okay.
You want to go first? Just quickly, I would put in that art is not made in a vacuum on the human scale either. So, I always get confused when people say they make art because it makes them happy, when like writing a book was like the worst thing that I've ever done. And I didn't make it because I wanted to be happy, it was because I wanted to figure something out. And I wanted to figure something out in the context of the world and other writers and other readers and other editors. And that's, you know, it wasn't as if I have like a pure impulse to create. Maybe some people do. Historically, I've never heard of that, like that it comes out of like this, that it exists in this like pure realm of no kind of like social context. So I would say that like probably machines also, like there has to be some kind of context to this like emotive, intentional drive.
Yeah, I have to add that you can get inspired on the different way, and of course, what I actually know after 4 years to work with the artificial intelligence, it is that the kind of inspiration to be inspired by the artificial muse worked on the same way like to be inspired on the nature in the classical way. It's completely the same story.
Okay, then one super final question.
Sorry, it's a short question, but do you think if we figured out how our human consciousness works, would it fasten up the building of an AI, or would we build something completely different, maybe just another human?
I think this is really interesting because I think that's the challenge. Can we fast track nature? You know, it's taken millions of years of evolution to arrive at a conscious bit of kit. Even if we understood how that happened, it may not be possible to fast track that. And I think that's what's interesting. You know, will AI have to go through as long a period of evolution to kind of achieve? You know, it's done some pretty amazing things just recently, but it may have to go all the way. Also, I think your point about AI, I generally translate AI as not artificial intelligence, but augmented or additional, and that's the most interesting thing. We know how to make human consciousness. It's much more fun than being in a computer laboratory. We do it in the bedroom. That's how we make human consciousnesses.
But I want to remind you that the concept consciousness was invented in modern times by Descartes. Conscire, it's a Latin word, and means a community knowledge, not individual knowledge, but the knowledge of a group. Consentire. Und Descartes adopted it for the individual, for the cogito. But we have to ask if it is a fact that there is something like consciousness. Sorry for giving you this question, but the Greek have done it very well without. And even a lot of other cultures don't have something like a word for consciousness. It is really a European idea how to define a subject in secularization, when God was going to earth and to the human subjects and their creativity. No? When the creativity of God was given to the humans, in this moment, consciousness was invented, not discovered, in my sense.
And so is the category of humanity. That's when we got humanity as such, right? Like there were many layers of humanity in Greek society, and they weren't all the same. So humanism was invented according to these ideas of singular consciousness, creativity, and authorship. So now to come into crisis with them only a few hundred years later, as if they're, the human being threatened when the human was just invented, I think is also quite a good point to bring up.
I think, yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.